Welcome to Rogue News. We are the preeminent geostrategic, geoeconomic, and geopolitical news show on YouTube and on the web. Join us for hard-hitting analysis, behind-the-scenes strategy, and brutal commentary. Find out why many consider us the place to get their news and information. Check us out at roguenews.com. Follow us on Twitter at Real Rogue News, Facebook, and most of the popular podcasting apps. Most of all, remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share. All right, folks. It is the one, the only, the brain trust himself, Matthew Ehret with the Multipolar Reality. Man, I want to let you know something, and I want to let the audience know something. I just ordered 2 copies of your book. I've ordered Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 3, The Birth of the Eurasian Manifest Destiny. And I also ordered Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 4, The Anglo-Venetian Roots of the Deep State.
Right on.
Now my collection is complete. And, folks, I recommend you do the same thing. Go over to CanadianPatriot.org or the RisingTideFoundation.net or subscribe to the Brain Trust Substack, MatthewEhret.com. It's a Substack, MatthewEhret.substack.com. The links are all in the description box. And if you guys don't believe me, watch this. You ready?
Yeah.
You can get his books on Amazon. You can get it at his website. Watch this. Just to show you. Bang. Arriving Sunday, baby.
Proof. Evidence. Hard evidence.
There it is.
Wow. Hey, hit the buy it again button. Hit the buy it again.
Buy it again? All right, here we go.
Buy it again.
Buy it again. I'll hit it. There you go. Buy it again. There you go. I bought it again. Because I'm crazy. I love it. I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
No, it's always great. It's always great to be on. And I know we didn't do our usual thing on Tuesday, so I'm glad that we got at least one show in this week before rolling into next week, because a lot is going on. A lot has happened. A lot is happening, and we got a lot to talk about. And I it's tough to always to decide where to start. But I was thinking, I'm speaking to you from Canada, so hey, why not, right? So
a lovely place. I heard there's a recent book burning that went on over there.
Oh yeah. I think they're preparing also some lynching, hetero lynchings are going to start as well in Ontario.
Matt, you're in the chapter of the book where they take they're going to line you up outside of a train station, man. We're heading into that chapter very quickly.
Yeah, don't jump ahead too quickly.
No, not too quick. Listen, I got to get you and Cynthia out of there.
Can't handle that chapter.
Oh my God. Matt, what I got to get you and Cynthia out of there. We need to rescue you.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. So, but up until then, before then, this week has been really, really interesting because we're all looking at India, and we see a little bit of a basket case at different times.
Yeah.
When you look at China's economic discipline, you look at their battle against their deep state, they're kicking out George Soros. You do the same thing for Russia. You could see that there's a clearer fight that is more clearly understood regarding where Russia and China, and especially Iran, have situated their future, the method, the battle plan that they've chosen to use in both defending their people, extracting their deep state weeds, as well as doing battle with the international oligarchy centered in London and Wall Street. So it's a little bit clearer. Whereas in India, you could see that the patriots, the real patriots, are not as clearly defined at certain times. India will all of a sudden pick a fight with China unnecessarily. They'll boycott a meeting that China's going to be at. They'll sign a military agreement with the United States to cooperate on all sorts of military exercises. That's not wise. That's not stupid. They'll also pick fights as well. They'll act all offended about the Pakistan-China economic partnership. So you're like, well, that's not clearly in India's interest to act this way. And then more recently, coming out of the G20, we all saw the Middle East, transportation corridor, which is like this weird doppelganger of the Belt and Road Initiative that is supposedly a U.S.-led India EU partnership that somehow brought on board Saudi Arabia and the UAE into some big project to build rail lines and development corridors stretching from India all the way to Europe. And you're like, that's also not a very wise thing. Like, why would you go and do something that's going to disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative? And of course, of course, and also the international north-south transportation corridor, right? That stretches from St. Petersburg in the Arctic all the way, even further in the Russian Arctic, all the way down into India via Iran, but also Azerbaijan, Armenia, which, by the way, if people haven't figured it out, that's why there is chaos in Azerbaijan and Armenia. The only reason why that's happening is because the international north-south transportation corridor is such a vital artery for a global recovery program, which is very much in harmony with the Belt and Road Initiative. So you're like, India, what are you doing, India?
Sure.
Now, I was a little bit relieved to see that, in some ways, that India is making all the right enemies. They refused to sign the condemnation statement at the G20 that they hosted recently, condemning, of course, Russia and supporting Ukraine. The Indians who were overseeing that event didn't permit that to happen. They earned the ire of the Biden clique, of Justin Trudeau and the Canadians, the British, the Europeans. Everybody was pissed off, but they didn't budge. That was very courageous that they stood up against that. The number two thing is this manifested in on the one hand, something happened to Justin Trudeau's airplane. He got stuck in India for 2 days.
Well, I mean, he got another additional day to play dress up. Maybe, he could wear his British Raj outfit while he dances to Bollywood music.
Yeah, it's interesting that was probably the thing that was the biggest that caused him more political damage than blackface. When the images came out of him doing blackface, that was less damaging to him than him looking like a fool with his giant treasure chest being carried around everywhere he went in India, dressed up like a doofus, where the Indian politicians are walking around with business suits acting professional. They're like, what is this clown doing? Nobody took that seriously. He didn't seem to do that so much this time around. But when he did finally get back to Canada, the first thing that happens is CSIS, our lovely Canadian variant of the CIA, leaks a report to the Globe and Mail.
Yeah.
They did the same thing a few months back with in February on the Chinese government election interference that nobody saw any evidence to. It was just a CSIS leaker leaks a report that it's basically gossip to the mainstream media that gets amplified. All of a sudden, bridges are burned it becomes a justifier for turning the mob of Canadians into anti-Chinese fanatics, and also advancing more anti-China sanctions from the Canadian government, all this stuff. So they're constantly burning down bridges. They did the same thing for India. And basically they said there's this, Canada is well known for housing all sorts of riffraff from around the world. Basically anybody who's part of a cult that's been created by Anglo-American intelligence anywhere in the world with the mandate of disrupting your country using acts of terrorism, drug running, child trafficking, you name it. We will give you sanctuary in a home if your government clamps down on you. And sure enough, there is a blood and soil separatist cult of Sikh separatists called basically they're Khalistanis. They believe that Khalistan should be
a made-up country, by the way, a total made-up country that you got some very creative British intel that helped them concoct this comic book fantasy, Matt. It's incredible to see this.
Yeah, and for anybody who's able to, I don't know how expensive this book is. EIR did a 1980s, I think 88 or 87. They wrote this book, EIR researchers, on who killed Indira Gandhi, derivative assassination.
Yeah.
This book, if you can go online and get this, it goes through what the hell this phenomenon is. I haven't fully finished reading it yet, but it is good. And one thing about Canada, we've been providing sanctuary, and to a lot of these groups who are obviously not very welcomed in India after having committed many heinous acts of terrorism locally. So of course, come to Canada, British Canada, we'll give you sanctuary. We do the same thing with the Nazi-loving Banderites of a Ukrainian bent. We've done this with pretty much, everybody who's a criminal in their country can come here. And be safe. Libyan Al-Qaeda operatives are brought here too, you name it. So one of the leading figures was shot. He was walking home at night, got shot. Nobody knows really the details, but the CSIS basically was wise enough to say, aha, it was the Indian government that coordinated this thing. Again, no evidence, but they did. As soon as everyone can trust patriotic CSIS, because CSIS cares about us.
Yeah, they do. They love you guys.
Yeah. What's CSIS? First of all, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. What are they? They are an outgrowth, first of all, and we did a documentary on this. I think for those who watch Rogue News regularly, we played this a couple of months back. Our new documentary on the ugly Nazi roots of CSIS. And when you actually look at it, they were created, this institution, officially in 1983. It was created because this particular special operations branch of the RCMP got caught way too many times red-handed organizing terrorist cells of FLQ terrorists. This was the sort of the Canadian version of the Weather Underground.
Yeah.
And planting bombs in public settings, and it was discovered that these were actually RCMP operatives from the special unit that were doing this. So one of them actually had a bomb blow up in his face. He had to go to the OR, the OR, and that was a big embarrassment because they're like, "Oh shit! How do we explain how our guy is planning this bomb next to the owner of some grocery chain?" And this all blew up around the same time as the Church Committee hearings that were going on in the United States. This all sort of came to the surface, and it was discovered that this thing called CSIS interfaces closely with the CSE, this other agency that's kind of like the Canadian NSA,
sure,
which is itself created as an information warfare unit. So you have the NSA and the CIA that work very close together. They're part of the Five Eyes. The CSE and that branch of the RCMP were sort of the same parallel thing in Canada, and both are coordinated by the GCHQ, which works very closely with MI5 and MI6. And that's how this whole international Five Eyes thing. The Australians and the New Zealanders have their own branch, and of course, there's like sub branches in Israel, and sub branches in France and Germany, but those aren't official. Those aren't they're because ultimately the British Empire, which manages this thing and created this whole UK-USA pact back in 1946, they ultimately are more than happy to sabotage and keep Germany and France down and just use them as their lapdogs if need be. But they ultimately, as we see right now with the economic policies, they want to destroy the economies and the people of both Germany and France. This branch of the RCMP, then with such a bad rap, there's such a bad light cast on them that they had to then create some new, more civilian branch of that would carry out the same tasks that they were doing, managing and protecting international and local terrorism, but do it under a new name, and that became CSIS, and that was set up by Michael Pitfield, who is a high-level clerk of the Privy Council. That's basically even though the name is like innocuous, clerk of the Privy Council. That's actually the most powerful position of the civil service of Canada on an official level.
The clerk of the Privy.
Yeah, clerk Council. Unelected.
Privy.
Privy Council. Yeah,
interesting, because privy, that term going back to the Middle Ages means like a water closet, a bathroom. I'm going to the privy. So he's the council of the bathroom.
That's exactly what it was.
In essence.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. Then the idea originally was only the most trusted of the advisors of the king will be permitted to wipe his ass.
Ah, yes, in the privy.
Yes,
the council of the privy.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so you had things like the groom of the stool, which was an official position for many generations. They say that it ended about a century and a half ago. They say that. I don't believe that they edited that. I don't think that Prince, I don't want to think about this, but I don't think that King Philip does his own business without assistance. All that to say, yeah, you're right. But so they have a Canadian branch of this thing that was set up when our fake country was set up back in the 19th century. And so Michael Pitfield was the clerk. He was known as Pierre Elliott Trudeau's shadow. Mm. He was also a co-founder of the Canadian Club of Rome, this whole network around Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Michael Pitfield, Roland Michener, who was our governor general. Maurice Lamontagne was another one who was the former president of the Privy Council office, worked very closely with Maurice Strong, another evil Canadian. All of these guys were the founders of the Canadian Club of Rome. Originally, that's what set up the limits to growth, that financed the limits to growth report in MIT. It was Canadian taxpayer money that made that pseudoscientific garbage a reality. And, that was basically the first computer model that introduced all of these different variables like population growth and pollution and like 30 other variables, and projected a vision of the future that was totally dystopic, with no accounting for the human mind, which you cannot plot in a computer model or new discoveries. None of that was accounted for. And they basically came to this conclusion, or the computer did, or the programmers of the computer did, funded by taxpayer money, that, we would have this population crisis unless governments acted now to prevent new discoveries and to reduce population levels now, which informed Henry Kissinger in his NSSM 200 report that changed U.S. foreign policy towards a depopulation orientation, withholding money if a recipient nation, let's say in Bangladesh or something, doesn't use, or in India, actually, India was a target for this. Henry Kissinger actually called for withholding food assistance if those countries do not enforce population control mechanisms.
Very loving of them.
Oh, it's so kind of them. And he documents this in a report that was so evil that they had to classify it for another 20 years. And people often attack Indira Gandhi for being like a promoter of population control. But it's like, no, that she had a gun to her head. I mean, the whole nation was going to be destroyed economically by Kissinger and the Trilateral Commission if they didn't submit to these demands. So she did what she did, and you could criticize it, but at the same time, like, look at who was actually shaping that process that won her a lot of haters. All that to say, Indira Gandhi she was a patriot for her people. She did at different times when the opportunity arose, stand up in defense of India. And she was assassinated for that. She was killed for that purpose, and her son Rajiv, who also became president of India, was also killed, assassinated in that way. She was killed by bullets. He was killed by sabotage on his plane. But either way, they represented a very, very anti-imperial tradition. At a certain point, they even were advised by Lyndon LaRouche, whose organization EIR wrote this book. So why am I saying all this? I'm saying this because CSIS grew out of that. CSIS also oversaw the Sikh terrorists, the Khalistani terrorists, out of British Columbia, which is their sort of home base, which carried out the biggest terrorist bombing of a civilian airliner in the Air India bombing in 1985. Wow. They killed 300 people, and here's
I remember that. I remember that.
You do?
Yeah. The Air India bombing, that was that 747 that went down back in what year was that again?
I think it was 85.
85, right? I remember that. I'm
Googling right now. Air India flight 182. Yeah, June 23rd, 1985. And Indira Gandhi. So I'm just doing a little search here.
That 747.
She was murdered. She had been murdered a few months earlier on October 31st, 1984.
Yeah, it was flying that whole Montreal to Delhi route.
Yeah. Now, the weird thing here is that CSIS had been overseeing and wiretapping all of those terrorists who carried out that bombing. There was thousands of hours of wiretaps, of surveillance, of informants within that group that was giving information to CSIS before it happened. What does CSIS do immediately afterwards? They burn every box containing the microfilms, containing the wiretaps.
Yeah.
All of it is burned immediately. What do they have to hide? Well, considering their former role in overseeing, managing, and even deploying terrorist groups in Canada in the 60s and into the 70s under the FLQ, blaming it, of course, always on China and Russia, because they would say, oh, these are Kremlin, Beijing-controlled terrorists. That's why we have to enforce more anti-commie legislation, as the Nazis, who were actually overseeing NATO and working with the CIA, those same Nazis and the Bandera-loving Nazis and fascists as well of Ukraine that were working with the CIA, that were never punished after World War II. This was integrated into the Western intelligence establishment. That is something that we will continue to have controlling our world politically, economically, while people are induced into a state of constant terror by these terrorists. That was the way the game was played, managed by CSIS or by the RCMP. So CSIS does this. We also know that the FBI, which also had their own COINTELPRO operation infiltrating different types of civil rights, freedom, anti-imperial groups throughout the 50s, the 60s, especially into the 70s, killing people like Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy. These were carried out directly as a CIA FBI run program. And we know that the FBI had informants in the case of the first 9/11 bombing, right? In 1993, you had a bombing, the first one that killed, I don't know how many people, but it killed a significant number of people. It was supposed to take the buildings down when a truck filled with bombs was placed in the basement of one of the World Trade Center buildings. Ahmad Salam, who was an Egyptian military official and somebody who was a part of those cells, was not just a part. He wasn't a member of those terrorist cells. He was somebody who was giving the blueprints, teaching the different participants how to make the bombs, how to carry them out. He was also an FBI informant who was recording his conversations with his FBI handler. He had hundreds of hours of conversations telling his FBI handler, this is going pretty far. You can do something about this now. We have enough evidence. You can do something about this. You could stop this. Stop. They're going to do this tomorrow. Stop this. And he was recording it because he could feel that he was getting thrown under the bus. And luckily, at the time, the New York Times still had something within it that was not as controlled as it is today, and permitted for these tapes to be covered and showcased after in the weeks after that bombing, proving that the FBI was actually responsible in many ways, possibly indirectly, but at the very least by an act of omission for that whole terrorist act. So Khalistan, these terrorists have been protected in Canada. Jagmeet Singh, who's the head of the third political party in Canada, is not allowed to fly to India. He hasn't been allowed since 2014 because he is one of these. He is directly in collusion with and promoting the line of these separatists. That's why he's not allowed. And India has been trying to get the Canadian government to do something about this. These groups are responsible for drug money as well as child trafficking and terrorist financing, but drug money laundering. They do this with the support of the major banking institutions like HSBC that are highly integrated. So that's all going on. I'm going to dig into this. I'm going to write something on this after I read Derivative Assassination, which people should buy this book. But it gave me a bit of support. It actually made me a little bit happy to see that they're going through so much work to burn the bridge between Canada, which, by the way, now Canadians, they're not issuing visas for people wishing to travel to India. That it's gotten that bad. So they're doing this, which in my mind, knowing the evil that's controlling Canada, it gives me a certain sense of optimism that India must be on the right side of history and not cooperating with the New World Order game such that they could earn such ire. So that's interesting.
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the West literally are so brain dead, and they don't realize how broken, poor, and destitute and naked they are in the West. They think that cutting off relations with India, that India has no other options. Like India cannot normalize relations with China and get into more Belt and Road initiatives where it benefits them as a country as a whole. There's no reason. And the faster the British componentry in India that's still there, very active amongst many of the politicians there, is weeded out and purged, the better off the country will be. Because I mean, this is good news that you stated. This is a very good news. And India should continue to march with its destiny, which is Eurasia, which is China, which is Russia. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing, it would be so easy. And perhaps there actually is, maybe behind the scenes, more, not maybe, I'm sure there is more evidence than a lot of people realize that India is not only part of the BRICS. This is, that's an important alliance that's grown now. It's growing to 11 members. You have Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina, who are all going to become full members of the BRICS. These represent some of the most strategic choke points, but also most strategically positioned nations of the world. That are not just those nations. They have huge alliances. I mean, Ethiopia is the home of the African Union. That's their headquarters in Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa is a long-planned node for the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, which already has a rail line, electrified rail, built up between Addis Ababa and Djibouti. That is going to extend across the continent of Africa through. When you look at the actual positions of the planned east-west rail line linking the continents from the Indian Ocean in Djibouti all the way to the Atlantic, it goes through all of those countries that have been through regime change, but actual military coups that have overthrown corrupt puppets of Western corporations, all the way from Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso Burkina Faso is a little bit lower, but they're all in this zone. And right below the Sahara, the Sudan also is a place which is highly prized, both by the evildoers, the death cultists who want to light it all on fire, as they have for Africa for the past over a century, but also for those who are nation builders, who are looking strategically. Like China has a deal with Sudan to upgrade about 6,000 kilometers of rail that was colonial derelict railways that they're going to modernize. They're already building that, and they're going to connect it down into Ethiopia. And Ethiopia already has an agreement to connect that rail line both east-west, but also down into Kenya, which has a deal already with Tanzania below them to connect that rail line that's already built up by China from Mombasa to Nairobi, all the way down, further down into Tanzania. And Tanzania already has a deal. China just had a conference in Tanzania on the future of Africa, promoting and even signing contracts with Chinese construction companies to build a rail line, the first one of its kind, that looks like it'll be built first, going from Tanzania to Congo, connecting ocean to ocean for the first time officially. It's a smaller gap towards the base. You have South Africa at a strategic point as well, which has, obviously a lot of corruption, a lot of Western-controlled deep state operatives, but you have something good in South Africa too. So you have this whole thing going on. And you have India. India is also a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Yes. So that's a very important security pact. There's 10 more states, member states, that are waiting on the wings to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You already have India and Pakistan, which are both now full members, with Iran. I didn't mention that, but Iran is also going to be a full member of the BRICS. This is another this goes hand in hand. I mean, what is going to be protecting all of this development? I mean, it's very risky to go into a hotspot like Syria right now. To go into Syria and build infrastructure is risky. You're going into an area where there are Western operatives like, ISIS, which have still been receiving protection in American-controlled, occupied northern Syria, which, by the way, has 80% of the wealth in the form of agriculture, but especially oil. That's in the north of Syria. That's where the U.S. haven't left, even to this very day. There's still U.S. military bases extracting the oil, controlling, even stealing the food grains on a people who are suffering from Western sanctions, who are starving. Despite that, this illegal occupation is still happening. There's still airstrikes coming in from some weird faction of the Israeli military. I don't understand that, but they're still doing it. There's still some faction within Turkey which is still protecting some elements within Idlib of these different terrorist groups that are treated as if they were freedom fighters. I don't fully understand that either, but that's still happening, despite the fact that Turkey has very seriously gone off the official New World Order script. They're making accommodations to something bad. Despite that, Bashar al-Assad is currently in China, right? Which is amazing. So what are they organizing? They're not going to say what are they doing? What contracts are they signing? They won't say that, because last time Middle Eastern, North African countries and leaders were saying what they were going to do. And here I'm talking about between 2004 to 2010. This was a period of high potential where you had, just look at the map, you had Gaddafi openly talking in a very, very revolutionary manner about a gold-backed dinar that was going to replace the IMF and the US dollar controls over trade. And that was going to be brought online to continue funding things like the great man-made water system that was extracting large amounts of water from below the Libyan desert of the Sahara and bring it up to the surface. That was going to create a food revolution, an agriculture revolution. That was almost finished. That went through its first and second phases with the help of SNC-Lavalin, a Canadian construction firm, which was building this thing. Big part of the reason why SNC-Lavalin was cracked down upon a few years ago as a corrupt entity, and many of its executives were fired, some were even put in jail, was because of this. They were unwieldy and unwilling to go along with the death cult agenda. But it wasn't Gaddafi going it by himself. You had Bashar al-Assad, who at the same time, starting in 2004, began his 5 C's vision. You heard about the 5 C's vision?
I've heard about the 5 C's vision. Yes, absolutely. That has to do with running the energy pipelines.
Energy and rail. It's
rail,
essentially like the BRI in the
Middle East.
Here, I'm just doing a little screen share here, if possible. Yeah, here it is. This is a map designed by all of the actual corridors that connect the Persian Gulf, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Red Sea. Were worked out already by Syrian and Middle Eastern engineers. This map was originally done, that I've seen it, by the Schiller Institute, which I got to give credit for them for that great work that they did. Hussein Askari and his collaborators in Sweden composed the map, but all of the actual rail lines, and there's other new rail lines that have been added to this too, based on new engineering feasibility studies. And Bashar al-Assad took the warnings of Wesley Clark seriously when Wesley Clark, the former head of NATO, the U.S. general, was saying, look, he blew the whistle, and he basically said publicly, I was given information from Paul Wolfowitz's circles that after we do a regime change in Afghanistan and Iraq, that the next on the line would be Syria, then Lebanon, then Iran, then Libya. Maybe not in that order. I might be mixing them up. But he basically outlined exactly what the plan for
5 countries in 7 years or something like that.
5 countries, or even more than that. Yeah, exactly.
Something like that, yeah.
And so Bashar al-Assad and Libya and all of these leaders realized they had to introduce a different type of game plan. So Bashar al-Assad's brilliant idea was to build rail corridors that would involve building new cities along key strategic points. But unfortunately, he and Libya and Gaddafi, also you had certain things in I would say this too, very importantly, in Sudan. But President Bashir, this is still 2009, had at this moment also called for the revival of the Jonglei Canal that we've spoken to in previous episodes. That would have been a connection that was already nearly finished in the 80s. A canal connecting the white and the blue Nile of Sudan in South Sudan. That was that's where you have 80% of the water and arable land is in the south of Sudan. Also, a lot of the oil. That canal that was blocked by a Western instigated civil war in Sudan back in the 80s is something that has been begging to be revived, because by doing that, you're going to create massive flood controls. I think it's going to be a doubling of the food production. Already today, every year, massive amounts of famine death happen in Sudan because of a variety of reasons. Crops are destroyed by flooding. In the north, there's too much desert. There's not enough water. So this canal was part of a bigger water project for the continent, which President Bashir valiantly fought for. And as a consequence, what happened in the ensuing years? You had the Arab Spring launched as sort of a pseudo color revolution for the Western for those Arab states that were not cooperating, starting with Tunisia, but then Egypt. Mubarak also was not behaving well. He was working very closely with Gaddafi on this idea for a gold-backed dinar, but he was also promoting certain projects. Even though Mubarak was very Western-leaning for most of his life, he began to see where the wind was blowing and began looking very seriously and treating and giving a lot of support to things like the nuclear desalination plants for water, salt water from the Mediterranean, to be brought into Egypt, where there's already natural cavities that could create natural reservoirs in Egypt. That would create abundance. It would relieve a lot of the tension that is needed to create conflict by the Western imperialists. Even today, there's those who are trying to provoke a war between Egypt and Ethiopia over the fact that Ethiopia has just finished, as of last week, the Grand Renaissance Dam 6.5 gigawatt hydroelectric dam built by the Ethiopians, financed by the Ethiopians, for not only the Ethiopians, but the entirety of the Horn of Africa is going to benefit by the massive amount of electricity that this dam is already now producing. But in Egypt and also in Sudan, Western deep state operatives have been trying to provoke the idea that this dam in Ethiopia, which is downriver, is further south. But the water in the Nile goes upriver, up into the Mediterranean, and they're saying, oh, look, Ethiopia is going to steal our water. We're already in a desert. We have to destroy the dam. Now, the dam is actually not going to reduce any water flows because it's not using the water in Ethiopia for agriculture, which would reduce the water. This is purely for electricity. So the water is simply turning turbines and still going right back into the stream. No water loss. But this conflict, you can get rid of these. These are only made possible due to the existence of scarcity. If you desalinate water, you reduce scarcity. You reduce the means of creating conflict. So all these countries were annihilated. Then you had official regime change starting with Iraq. So these projects that were moving in a very good direction by 2009, 2010 were all destroyed. The first thing that NATO did when they got into Libya, they bombed the great man-made water project and the vital infrastructure, as well as the museums, like they did for Iraq earlier on. Syria as well faced the same thing because Bashar al-Assad had made it public. He shouldn't have done that, and they didn't have China or Russia at that time. Both China and Russia were still too weak politically and economically to provide a sphere of foreign policy that would protect such projects. So they were standing on their own, and they got wiped out for it. Today, it's different. So when Bashar al-Assad and his wife go to Beijing with a massive economic delegation from Syria, they were given the Chinese official presidential plane that was sent into to Syria, to Damascus, to pick them up, to fly them back to Beijing. They will not say, just like they haven't said, what the grand design will be, but you know what it is, because this is what they were already fighting for a long time. So Syria has also been brought back into the Arab League recently, right? So they were kicked out as part of the plan to isolate them. They're brought back in. This is all showcasing that this is all made possible by Chinese diplomacy, as well as the Russians working behind the scenes to make things happen. You got Iran as well, which was on the verge of going to war with Syria at different times. They had cut off all diplomatic alliances. Now, all of a sudden, the Iranians and the Saudis are both members of the BRICS. Saudi Arabia is quickly going to become a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. They've made that intention known. That's the security agreement, the security organization that's sort of a counterpole to NATO. They've created new embassies again. They've rehabilitated their relationship. The same thing goes for Saudi Arabia and Yemen, which had a brutal war, largely instigated by foreign agencies in the West. That finally, due to, again, the Chinese, who have put forth a Belt and Road, a reconstruction program that would benefit both Yemenis as well as Saudis, starting with a high-speed rail line that's already being built, connecting Oman and UAE all the way down through the Arabian Desert. It's about 2,400 kilometers all the way to the Red Sea. That would then connect down into Yemen, and then easily you could easily, with this type of project and momentum, build a connection from Yemen, which has a 28 mile separation, to Djibouti in Africa, that already has the rail built up by China. That you could have a bridge or a tunnel, but most likely a bridge. And those designs were already put forward by a Saudi company in 2008 to build what's called the Bridge of the Horn, of the Horn of Africa. That was already done. It was about that would involve several pipelines, water, oil, natural gas pipelines, but also rail, high speed, as well as a car lane, a 6-lane highway for cars. The feasibility studies already began before the Arab Spring. And you had people within Yemen who were all for this, in Saudi Arabia, in Djibouti, in Eritrea, in Ethiopia, who were all for this. And that was all blown up. And you had like two cities, what are called I think it was called the Nome cities, or two sister cities on either side of the Strait of the Bab el Mandeb Strait, connecting Yemen to Africa. Now, that is also, there's discussion now that is already happening to bring that back. You have programs also for Israel, even. I mean, and this is a little bit of a touchy one. This is probably the most challenging of all of the problems of Southwest Asia is the issue of Israel, because frankly, it's a bit of a psych case. It's like a psych trauma case.
It really is a psych trauma case.
Huh?
It really is a psych trauma case when you talk about Israel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's crazies, and there's crazier crazies, and then there's crazier crazies, and they're fighting each other. And then you have like some sane rational actors within Israel too, who don't get a lot of play. But you've seen like some examples of them, like around 1995, when the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a radical Kabbalistic sect of hardcore Orthodox radicals. He was killed. He was murdered. And I've seen from the work by EIR was pretty good on this front as well back in the day, that these were actually operatives who had been created as a synthetic cult generations earlier by British intelligence. I mean, a lot of the worst elements of the radical political Zionist groupings that believe in a greater Israel. The idea that Israel currently, as we see it on the map, is only a fraction of what it is destined to become, which will involve taking most of Syria, most of Iraq, a big chunk of Turkey.
These people are insane, man. They're freaking insane.
Yeah. They believe that this is what the Messiah ordained for the Messiah is the chosen people.
The Messiah.
Yeah, the Messiah. It's gonna get messy.
The Messiah. That's what's gonna happen, man. Oh my god.
So you got these guys, but then so here's the interesting thing. I've been looking at this, trying to wrap my mind around how is Russia and China thinking about dealing with Israel, because it's so much crazy. There's a lot of corrupt organized crime. You got the Meyer Lansky, Bronfman networks that were built up in the 40s and 50s that are still like massive agencies that were part of what Epstein represented. With the MAGA group. You got that shit. That's unworkable. Then you got the Yuval Harari that overlaps actually with the Yuval Harari technocratic death.
Another genius, by the way. He's a real expert in technology and futurism, even though he only has a degree he has a mediocre degree in history. Like a real bad one from he's a nobody. He's an absolute nobody.
No, I know. It's a joke, right? Like he loves H.G. Wells so much. And he described that it's H.G. Wells who gave him his inspiration to be the man he is.
He's a lunatic who's grew up in nihilistic sci-fi novels and dystopian narratives and whatnot. The guy's a nut job. He's
I know.
So mediocre. Yeah. He's so mediocre.
So here's what I'm thinking. What I noticed
is that a carrot?
Bean. Yeah.
I love carrots.
Yeah, it's carrot.
I love raw carrots, bro.
They're not bad. They're these little baby pre-cut carrots. I usually have dip with them. It's weird.
Same here. I usually dip ranch, a good quality ranch. Yeah, it's like my thing. I love it.
Me too. This feels strange, but
now all you're missing is some quality buffalo wings on the side to go with that, and you're good.
Don't get me started. I can't ideas when my stomach's working. All right. So I'm gonna put the carrot away. So here's the thing. I was like, well, how are the Russians and the Chinese thinking, right? Like if I were to put myself in their shoes, because they obviously see a role. They don't see that Israel is going to be wiped off the map in the emerging new system that they're trying to manage or bring online. So what do they think that they can work with? And Israel is not one thing, right? Just like America is not one thing. Saudi Arabia isn't one thing.
Correct.
If it was, there would be no reason to believe that it were ever possible for Saudi Arabia to break free of being a promoter of terrorism, a funder of terrorism, that it was for most of its existence since the British created that nation back in the 30s. The same time as they were putting online the foundation for Israel.
Sure.
Which is again British intelligence, and ironically, mostly those who were the most the most active leaders of Britain who were managing the Balfour Accords, including Lord Balfour himself, leading Fabian, as well as he worked very closely with the Milner Group. Lord Milner and that whole roundtable group were very active in promoting the state of Israel out of the British mandated Palestine. They were all radical anti-Semites who despised the Jews, as Unter mentioned. They hated the Jews. They loved Nazis. They were actually the groups who were the most loud in support of bringing Nazism into existence and promoting it as a political solution to all of our problems. That was these groups. You're like, why would these most radical anti-Semitic agencies who hate the Jews, though they like the Kabbalah, because that's more of a Babylonian occult thing, that's part of a neo... a new form of rite of initiation to self-indoctrinate and hypnotize inductees into a new set of identities that will be created for them as they rise through the ranks of the mysteries, you know. So they like the Kabbalah part because it's not really Jewish. It's more just using Jewish text as a way to put yourself into a trance, infused with other like satanic meanings that are controlled by a higher priest class. So they like that part. But as far as the actual Jews themselves, they despise them. So, like, why are all these people behind this? What's going on? And then what are these people like Yitzhak Rabin or his assistant Yossi Beilin, the foreign minister of Israel? What are they doing when they're making all of these enemies with the right people? Such to that Rabin is getting killed. What's he doing? What's he thinking? What's his vision? What's his vision of Israel? What's his vision of Judaism? How is it different from the Likud groupings or the Kabbalist fanatics or these other technocratic freaks like the Yuval Harari types, you know, the hardcore atheist nihilist Jews. So like there's definitely something there. And I've noticed that, especially in Russia, there's been a discussion that's been underway. I'm seeing the earliest traces that I could find so far at this stage in my research.
Yeah.
Goes back about 15 years to the idea that the Temple Mount, you know, the third temple, the Solomon's Temple that has been already destroyed twice.
Yep.
There's a big prophecy that you can't put this thing back in the bottle. Like that it has to be rebuilt at the time when the Messiah will come. So they got this idea that's been really there, that somehow building this physical temple at this physical location is so needed as part of the bringing back of the Messiah. Now, how that happens is there's not an agreement of how that happens. You got some groups that say, well, to do that requires a destruction of the Holy of Holies. It's a Muslim Dome of the Rock that's currently there, that's been there for centuries. That has to be destroyed. And then when that's destroyed, then we can build the third Solomon's Temple. That means holy war. So you got them. And we know a lot of them. A lot of them are the settlers that are like, you know, that have their little compounds that they set up in the Gaza Strip and other things with like a gated community with machine guns. And then everybody around them are like in these terrible third world situations, you know, getting shot at and terrorized by those living in their mansions and with their pools inside these little gated or even like walled communities. So you got those freaks. But then you have those who are saying, well, no. There's actually a debate. And I've noticed this again. It's active inside of some of the Jewish communities in Russia as well, that maybe we could do this peacefully. That nowhere does it actually say that you have to destroy. None of the Jewish text does it say you have to destroy any Muslim holy sites to build this temple. We could build it feasibly. There's no legal reason why we can't, in peace. So you have two holy sites coexisting side by side, and have a joining a cooperative policy with Islam together with Judaism, and that's something we should do. And then that way you satisfy those who want to have that third temple, but you don't go to war. That's a thing. I didn't realize, but that's a big thing. And then you have, for those who you know, you have sub fights too, because you have some people who say, no, we have to wait for the Messiah to come, and then when he comes, then we can build it. And then you have others who say, no, we have to build it, and then he'll come, as if that's making
if you build it, he will come.
It's like you're talking about your idea of
Field
God.
of dreams right here, man.
Does God really care that much about? I don't know. Maybe I'm just being an ignorant, you know.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Every attempt that they've made to rebuild this temple throughout the course of millennia has failed, to the point where I don't remember who it was, but I forgot the name of the guy. He was known as Joseph the Cursed or something like that, where he attempted to rebuild the temple, and what happened was that lightning struck him dead from the sky. This is actually recorded. It was part of his recordings. I gotta dig that up, but it was something along those lines. There were multiple lightning strikes, and he was killed by having lightning kill him. So so this obsession they have it's just poor hermeneutics, poor exegesis in terms of extracting what the text is actually saying. It's insanity, man. They're hung up on this.
It is pretty nuts. But at the same time, like I said, the thing that I'm finding interesting is that it seems like Netanyahu, he seems to get along pretty well with Putin. He got along pretty well with Trump. He was one of the first foreign diplomats that went to China when the Belt and Road Initiative was unveiled back in 2013. And the Likud party is pretty crazy that he represents. But he's been promoting. He actually came out openly on many occasions celebrating the Belt and Road Initiative as one of the keys for Israel's problems. It seems as though, and I'm not saying this is 100% God's truth here, but from what I'm gathering, it seems like he is trying to negotiate an agreement that will not involving burning Israel off the map, as the founders of Israel in Britain, I believe, always desired. I think those who actually charted the course for bringing all the world's Jews into a controlled geographical domain in this highly volatile zone of Southwest Asia that they would have to keep destabilized to make sure that the world island would be always divided to be better conquered, because Israel is Jerusalem is the core, the intersection of these great civilizations of China and of Russia and of Africa and the Middle East, the Arab world and Europe. It all intersects there. So who could ever destabilize that zone and keep it destabilized controls the world island, a la Mackinder. So I think that those who wanted to take the Jewish problem, which was the fact that you have these Jews without homes everywhere in the world, and extract them, especially from Russia, from Eastern Europe, but also from the broader Europe, and just put them all in a controlled area, use them as much as possible, and then burn them when they're no longer useful. I think that they had a similar vision for the Saudis as well. Like let's put this particular Bedouin tribe into a position of power, and we'll use them for as much as we can use them during the Cold War period, and then we'll burn them off the map when needed. We'll flush them. That's where the Saudis, I think, finally realized how non-indispensable they are when they made their shift back in 2017, flushed Prince Bandar bin Sultan and a lot of the worst elements of this satanic agency, and then moved towards a pro-China, pro-Russia orientation. I think the same thing was sort of the same lesson needs to be learned. And some some Jews have learned this who live in Israel, who have political power. Others still have to learn this. They haven't learned this lesson yet, and they have political power. They have influence, which you have to negotiate with. There's not one Israel, though. Again, Lyndon LaRouche back in the 70s was putting online this beautiful vision. I wish I still had the program for it, for the Oasis Plan for Israel and Palestine, which was very much what Yitzhak Rabin was bringing online, because it basically called for economic development as the basis for peace. And it involved the idea that, okay, well, what's a common theme that's needed between both the Palestinians as well as the Israelis? Water. Water is the number one thing. That's what's lacking in that zone. There's a lot of water, but it's in the Mediterranean and it's salty. So LaRouche, working with engineers, and he had a lot of collaborators in the Middle East, even in Israel, looked at what would be the most feasible way to desalinate water, and it would involve about 4 major nuclear power plants built up on the Mediterranean. Egypt's already doing that now with Russia helping to build the Sana'a nuclear reactors that are already under construction. That would be done on the Mediterranean, built by both Palestinians and Israelis working together. So before trying to sign some formal peace agreement with nothing to back it up, start with economic development first. Get the ball in motion for people who have a lot of animosity with each other, a lot of prejudice, a lot of hate, right? Wrongs done on both sides. Get them starting to build something for their kids. And when Yitzhak Rabin asked in 1993 for World Bank money to go towards building infrastructure that would benefit both the Palestinians, which is when he was meeting with Yasser Arafat, right? And they were shaking hands at Camp David for the 2-state solution. That was built around the idea of taking the first tranche of IMF and US loans and putting it towards infrastructure instead of simply debt repayment. The IMF and Western GARCs around Bill Clinton had basically an emergency meeting and made sure that would not happen. And they guaranteed that only that money that we give you will be allowed to go towards paying off your previous debts and not towards building any infrastructure. So without building infrastructure, it couldn't happen. You couldn't get a durable peace. No chance. So Did that movement that Yitzhak Rabin get completely wiped out when he was murdered? I don't think so. And I'm again seeing there's discussions that have been underway from Israeli think tanks, certain Israeli politicians, to connect rail with the support of China in Israel to create economic initiatives, economic incentives, and opportunities for both Palestinians, again, and Israelis and Lebanese, just on the neighboring Israel, as well as Syrians, because a lot of this rail would connect into Syria. You already have rail being built between Iraq and Syria, and Iraq and Iran. That's already been, the Shalom Shah Basra Railway is already being built up. I think it's already finished. This is going to be a southern route of the Silk Road that will go through Syria, but that would also feasibly go through both Lebanon, with ports in Lebanon, right, but also ports in Israel, as well as through another branch in the Red Sea that would then connect high-speed rail, which is already being built by a French company in Egypt, connecting the Red Sea to the Mediterranean through Egypt, as well as a new capital is being built as we speak in Egypt, with high-speed rail going down there, and new special economic zones that are very, very closely aligned to both Russia and China in Egypt. And like I said, there's discussion right now for rail to go even further south down into Sudan, through Egypt down south, as well as that would connect into this revamped Chinese-funded grid of 5,000 to 7,000 kilometers of rail line in Sudan that would then go down, perhaps even finishing the Jungle Eye Canal finally. So far, they've avoided falling into a civil war. That's been a miracle so far, but that Jungle Eye Canal has to be finished. That would create a breadbasket for the Sahel, and that would continue that rail line all the way down into Djibouti, where you have already, like I was saying before, rail lines going from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia all the way down to Kenya, to Tanzania, east, as well as more south into South Africa, and other eastern, east-west rail links that we already see on the Africa Union 2063 program, which it's a different idea of sustainable development. So when you then what we see coming out of the Euro and American technocratic freaks, when they say sustainable development, when they say a green economy in the West, it doesn't mean the same thing. The same words do not mean the same thing as when you hear one of these nations from Africa or Eurasia saying the same words. It means something different. And that's very important, because a lot of people right now are getting hardcore blackpilled, and it's happening in a serious way. People I've known who were completely supportive of the Multipolar Alliance, I'm getting messages saying, look, I've read Ian Davis's piece, I've read this piece, I've read James Corbett's thing, and you're wrong. They're all in on it. We're all doomed. Like I get this shit all the time. People are like melting, because again, they're all stuck in this intellectual nominalism where the very people are seeing that the same word, a word used here and a word used there, they don't recognize might have a different context, a different set of ideas about the world that are infusing meaning into the same words. And so they're melting down. But this is what you see actually in the Africa Union. It's not the same thing as the European Union. The European Union is based on a death cult. The Africa Union, look at their program for the Agenda 2063. Look at what they're doing. It's based on an idea of development and improving the quality of life and creating abundance, not eating bugs, but creating abundance, creating a bigger space for more people to live at longer life expectancies. We see it. You could see the increased longevity, the destruction of poverty. China has pulled over 800 million people out of poverty in the past 20 years. That's the very opposite of what the New World Order is trying to do. The New World Order is trying to increase poverty and decrease overall population, as well as decrease longevity and increase infant mortality. They're doing that with a variety of ways, but you see the opposite happening with the Multipolar Alliance, which is why this show is called the Multipolar Alliance and not something else. So people have to just think about processes over nominalism. Be verb-oriented in your mind, not noun-oriented. A noun-oriented thinker thinks that the world is made up of objects that are just these fixed objects with definitions associated with them that give them access to the essence of the thing. That is Aristotle. That's the Aristotelian method. It doesn't work. That's not how the universe works. The universe works according to causal processes of change, principles that cause change from one state to another. That process is a verb orientation. It's an action orientation. The context shapes the meaning and the essence of an object. It's not anything but that. So I would just leave that at that final lesson of the mind for the audience for today.
Matthew Ehret, the man, the myth, the brain trust himself. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today and breaking this down, because this is very important that people understand the context of this. And I urge all of you to go back and listen to this program again, take some notes. And I also urge you to really get a grasp of the foundation of all this, because if you don't have a foundational understanding of all this, you're gonna flip in your mind, man. You're gonna be like, oh no, it's all the same. Just like people who, listen to idiots like Corbett and whatnot who get into this binary way of thinking. Folks, the multipolar world, the world politics in general, is a very complex, very nuanced world where it's not, black and white. There's a lot of gray areas. So words, terminology used by one faction, by one party, does not mean the same thing in another region with another faction and another party. You have to get an education of this. This is why it's like so many people, so many Westerners, okay? The rest of the world understands it, but so many Westerners, the whole multipolar reality flies over their heads because they don't understand that. They don't understand that because they've been inured, they've been indoctrinated by a singular myopic worldview that says 1 + 1 is 2, it's black, it's white, it's good, it's bad. And that's that Marvel Comics type of mentality, right? It's not a superhero movie, so to speak. So you got to get the education. That's why I urge people, listen, get the books. Get Matthew Ehret's books. Get Cynthia's books. It's very vital for you to do that. I mean, go on, spend some time shopping on Amazon. Pick up a bunch of Ehret's books. Pick up some LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche's books. Get a grasp of how it's really playing. Get that book right there, Derivative Assassination, to understand the play-by-play of what's happening, and read it, study it, take some notes. That's the best thing. And get some carrots with some ranch, and order yourself some buffalo wings and enjoy your Friday.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Exactly. I'm gonna get some wings now because of you.
I'm gonna do it too. You inspired me. Yeah, all right.
I'm gonna order some wings. All right. I gotta go.
Right.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend. Cheers.
All right, you too. Bye, guys.
Bye.